Greg and I had grown up together, and we both had that vivid childhood experience of what this theater can mean to people. And we just knew the building had to live. There was real danger of it becoming a parking lot. That was on the table.
My family, my father particularly, was very gung-ho on the theaters, going to movies. Not only did we come to the Fox, but we went to many of the other ones in town. There were quite a few.
My first memory was up in the balcony. I was about 9 years old, and my sister and her friends had allowed me to tag along on a movie visit. And the movie that we were coming to was Red Shoes and Oklahoma. And I didn't know anything about that. I came, the movie started. It was very boring. So, as a typical 9-year-old, I went up to the ramp and I started rolling down the ramp. And I spent minutes rolling down the ramp, just walking back up to the top, rolling down, because the movie was very boring. And on one of my trips up the ramp, all of a sudden, the next movie started, and I didn't realize it was a double feature. It wasn't called Red Shoes in Oklahoma. It was Red Shoes was the short about a ballerina, and then the main film was Oklahoma, the musical. And all of a sudden there was Curly riding through the cornfields singing "Oh, What a Beautiful Morning," and I was just transfixed. And I just remember walking back to my seat and just sitting there transfixed for couple hours, however long that movie was. And that was my first experience of this theater and the magic of the movies.
Mine was very close to Martha's. My dad liked the balcony. We sat up in the balcony, and the first show I remember seeing when I was probably around 9 or 10 was The Guns of Navarone. And in those days, I was just fascinated with the sound system, because in that show, when they shot their guns, the theater was just an excellent place to hear those kind of sounds.
I happened to be chairman of downtown development at the time the Fox became a local issue. The theater had been closed. It was put up for auction, and it was bought by two different owners, one who bought the land lease and another who bought the theater itself. And the guy who bought the land lease also bought the fixtures of the theater. And there was real dissension over who actually owned what in this theater, and it was headed to court. So we had some very visionary city planners and assistant city planner who identified this as a community problem and put together a task force to work on it and help bring the owners together on a mutual vision. And so, because by virtue of my position, I was put on that task force, and so the adventure began.
Well, I had just purchased the business from my father. My father had an optical business here in town, and he retired, and I purchased it from him. And it was a good business, and we were doing well. I was kind of unbeatable. There wasn't anything I felt like I couldn't do. And before I got involved with the theater, I had already purchased other buildings on Main Street. And the city had gone through a real depression when the mall opened up and half of downtown literally closed. And there were a few of us who still stayed on Main Street who wanted to see the downtown survive. We thought it was going to die. And during that time, the only way I could really get that much involved was to purchase buildings and clean them up, fix them up, and then go out and beat the bushes and recruit people to come back downtown. And I did that for several years, and it was very successful. So again, I felt like I could do a lot for the downtown. And then of course, we were all going to Salina to look at some of their projects. And that's when I sat behind Martha, and yes, I did. I eavesdropped all the way up to Salina on what she and the city planner were talking about, which most I did not even know about. I did not know that Martha had been on a committee to try to do something with the theater and had pretty much given up. And that really, I said, we cannot lose the theater. It was just too important to the downtown of Hutchinson, and actually to the whole community of Hutchinson. And listening to them for an hour really lit my candle, and gave me the excitement to go and talk to Martha and to try to recruit her for this project.
So we jumped in, even though we were both in our mid-30s. It was our parents' generation who did this kind of thing. And in fact, the key to the Fox happening was by enlisting our parents' generation to come forward and help fund it and everything. But we were the hands and feet of the project, and we were just driven by different things. I was personally very driven by an awareness of tourism and what it could mean to a community. I was also driven by some workshops that I'd been going to about building community. And the thesis of this particular workshop I went to was that we had to have spaces in our communities where people could come together, people of all walks of life, of all ages, because we were developing what he called an illusion of separateness. So to combat that, we needed to come together. Where do you come together? And in Hutchinson, Kansas, how many buildings do we have that literally bring people together of all generations? I'm the 5th generation in my family to be in this theater. It gives me goosebumps thinking about it.
All during the, when Martha and I were banging our heads together trying to figure out how we were going to do this, I was never really the arts person. I was, in our little relationship, I was the brick and mortar person, but I really learned a lot about doing this because I found out what we could do with the theater. And in our days, years of selling this to the community, which was not easy, we talked about the different groups that could use the theater. And so therefore I became quite a bit more knowledgeable of what these groups did and who they were and how we could get them associated with the theater.
A key to making any project work, I think, is having fun. There's something kind of magical that happens when you start having fun together. A chemistry starts happening, whether it's just sitting around a board table. And eventually we had people of at least 2, maybe 3 generations sitting around that table, but all connected by that mutual passion and respect for what was possible. And whether they were coming from a construction point of view or an arts point of view, we had this thing in common. So I would just say, look for your peeps, and don't be surprised by the variety of people who you will need to pull something off, and how the project will bond you.
And I think the community has really stepped forward on this project. This was not an easy project. We had a lot of naysayers in those days for a lot of different reasons, and the community did come forward. I'll never forget it was the craziest thing we ever came up with, but we were in the process of doing little cleaning, little restorations and things, and Martha came up with the idea, why don't we go to the community and ask them to donate toothbrushes so that we could scrub the walls and we can scrub the floors. We had no intentions of using those toothbrushes, and they delivered hundreds and hundreds of toothbrushes to us. So the community's fantastic. I think they have always stepped forward, and I think they always will.
I think when you're young, you have a lot of assets. One is energy, one is ignorance, one is time, and passion. Passion is everything, and I think everyone needs to be empowered to know that no matter how old you are or who you think you are, you're here for a reason. You can make a difference.